The art of crafting a compelling introduction. In this lecture, we're embarking on what I consider one of the most transformative skills in doctoral education, moving beyond mere literature, searching to crafting compelling introductions that position your research as an essential contribution to scholarly knowledge. I want you to understand that we're not just learning how to find and organize sources. We're learning how to construct intellectual arguments that make readers care about your research, understand why it matters, and become invested in your findings before they even encounter your data. This represents the intersection of rigorous scholarship and compelling communication, where your ability to tell a story about your research becomes just as important as the research itself. By the end of this lecture, you will possess a comprehensive toolkit for transforming literature searches into compelling research narratives, understanding how academic writing functions as storytelling, mastering the theoretical frameworks that make research interesting, and constructing introductions that set the hook for your readers from the very first sentence. We'll be drawing on foundational works by Davis on what makes theories interesting, Grant and Pollack's framework for setting the hook, Boyglesteig and Bird's guidance on avoiding desk rejects, Dorobantu and colleagues' research canvas, and Timothy Pollack's insights on storytelling in academic writing. These aren't just writing techniques, they represent a fundamental understanding of how knowledge is created, communicated, and accepted within scholarly communities. Learning objectives. The learning objectives represent a comprehensive transformation in how you approach academic writing and research positioning. First, you will master the narrative architecture of academic writing by understanding how Freytag's pyramid and the hourglass model provide structural frameworks that transform dry literature reviews into compelling scholarly narratives that guide readers through complex intellectual terrain with clarity and purpose. This isn't about making your writing more entertaining. It's about recognizing that human cognition processes information through narrative structures, and aligning your writing with these cognitive patterns makes your research more accessible, memorable, and persuasive. Second, you will learn to identify and apply Davis's 12 categories of interesting propositions to challenge taken for granted assumptions in your field, transforming routine literature reviews into opportunities for intellectual innovation that make readers reconsider fundamental beliefs about organizational phenomena. Davis's framework provides a systematic approach to identifying research opportunities that matter, moving beyond simple gap-filling to genuine intellectual contribution that advances understanding in meaningful ways. Third, you will master Grant and Pollack's 3 essential questions that every compelling introduction must answer: who cares, what do we know and don't know, and what will we learn, along with sophisticated problematizing techniques that position your research as addressing significant theoretical or practical challenges, rather than merely filling arbitrary gaps in existing literature. This represents the difference between research that gets published and research that gets cited, between work that meets technical requirements and work that influences how scholars think about important issues. Fourth, you will learn to construct 4-paragraph introductions using Boyglesteig and Bird's framework that systematically guides readers from broad, contextual understanding through specific research gaps to your particular contribution and its implications. This structure provides a reliable template for organizing complex arguments while maintaining narrative flow and intellectual coherence. Fifth, you will understand how to use the AMJ Management Research Canvas as a coherence checking tool that ensures all elements of your research design fit together logically and support your overall argument. This canvas prevents the common doctoral student mistake of developing research projects where the pieces don't align, creating confusion for readers and reviewers. Finally, you will integrate Timothy Pollack's insights on storytelling in academic writing to understand how narrative techniques enhance rather than compromise scholarly rigor, learning to craft research stories that are both methodologically sound and intellectually compelling. Why compelling introductions matter. As doctoral students, you must understand a sobering reality about academic publishing that will fundamentally shape how you approach your research communication. The average academic article receives fewer than 10 citations, and many receive none at all. This isn't because the research is necessarily poor or the findings unimportant. It's often because the authors failed to make a compelling case for why their work matters, failed to position their research within broader scholarly conversations, or failed to communicate their contributions in ways that make other scholars want to engage with and build upon their work. Consider the difference between two hypothetical studies on employee engagement. The first opens with a dry recitation of statistics about engagement levels and proceeds to identify a gap in the literature about engagement in remote work settings. The second opens with a compelling vignette about how the pandemic transformed work relationships, challenges conventional assumptions about what drives engagement, and positions the research as addressing a fundamental puzzle about human connection in digital work environments. Both studies might use identical methods and generate similar findings, but the second is far more likely to be read, cited, and influential because it makes readers care about the research question and understand why the answers matter. This difference isn't about academic marketing or superficial appeal. It reflects a deep understanding of how knowledge is created and transmitted within scholarly communities. Academic writing is fundamentally about persuasion, about convincing other scholars that your research addresses important questions, uses appropriate methods, generates meaningful findings, and contributes to ongoing conversations in ways that advance collective understanding. The introduction is where this persuasion begins, where you establish your credibility, demonstrate your understanding of the field, and make your case for why readers should invest their time and attention in your work. The frameworks we'll explore today, from Davis's categories of interesting propositions to Pollack's storytelling techniques, aren't about making academic writing more entertaining or accessible to general audiences. They're about understanding how scholarly communication actually works, how ideas gain traction within academic communities, and how to position your research for maximum impact within the specific context of academic discourse. The architecture of academic storytelling, Freytag's pyramid, and the hourglass model. Academic writing at its finest follows narrative principles that reflect how human cognition processes complex information. This isn't to suggest that we abandon rigor for entertainment, but rather that we recognize how narrative structure enhances comprehension, retention, and persuasion even in the most technical, scholarly contexts. Two models provide essential frameworks for understanding this narrative architecture: Freytag's pyramid and the hourglass model. Gustav Freytag, a 19th century German novelist and playwright, analyzed the structure of classical and Shakespearean dramas to identify a 5-act structure that he argued was universal to compelling narratives. This structure, known as Freytag's pyramid, consists of exposition, introducing characters, setting, and fundamental conflict, rising action, complications that build tension, toward the climax, the turning point where central conflict reaches its peak, falling action, consequences of the climax unfold, and denouement or resolution, conflicts are resolved and new equilibrium is established. We can map this dramatic structure directly onto the architecture of empirical research articles. Exposition becomes your introduction, where you introduce your research domain, establish why it matters, and present the fundamental puzzle or conflict that your research will address. Rising action corresponds to your literature review and theory development, where you build intellectual tension by showing how previous scholars have grappled with your puzzle, where their efforts have fallen short, and how the tension in the literature has been building toward the kind of resolution your study will provide. The climax is your methods and results section, the moment of truth, where your theoretical predictions meet empirical reality, and the tension you've built reaches its peak as you reveal what your data actually show. Falling action occurs in your discussion, where you work through the implications of your findings and show how they resolve the tensions you've identified. Denouement is your conclusion, where you establish the new equilibrium and show how the field should think differently as a result of your contribution. The hourglass model provides another lens for understanding academic communication, describing how information flows through a research article from broad to narrow and back to broad again. At the top of the hourglass, Your introduction starts with a wide-angle view of your research domain, writing for a general academic audience, and providing enough context that scholars outside your immediate specialty can understand why your work matters. As you move into your literature review, the focus narrows to speak to the specific scholarly community that works on your particular puzzle. The narrow waist represents your research question, methods, and results, the most specific part of your paper, and the unique contribution that only your study can make. Then the hourglass widens again as your discussion broadens the implications of your findings, connecting them back to larger theoretical conversations, and your conclusion offers the widest perspective on how your work changes understanding of the broader domain. Understanding these narrative principles is crucial because they reflect how human cognition processes complex information. When you follow these structures, you're not just organizing information, you're creating cognitive pathways that allow readers to follow your reasoning and be persuaded by your arguments. The interesting factor, Davis's revolutionary framework. Now let's turn to Davis's 1971 masterpiece, That's Interesting. This paper fundamentally changed how we think about what makes scholarship compelling and provides a systematic framework for identifying research opportunities that matter. Davis begins with a provocative claim that challenges everything we typically think about academic success. It has long been thought that a theorist is considered great because his theories are true, but this is false. A theorist is considered great, not because his theories are true, but because they are interesting. Think about the implications of this statement. Davis is arguing that truth, while necessary, is not sufficient for scholarly impact. What matters is whether your work is interesting, whether it makes people think differently about familiar phenomena. This insight is particularly relevant for doctoral students because it shifts the focus from simply being correct to being compelling. Your dissertation doesn't just need to be methodologically sound. It needs to change how people think. Davis defines interesting very precisely. An interesting theory is one that denies certain assumptions held by its audience. It challenges what people take for granted. It makes readers say, "I never thought of it that way before." The key insight is that interesting theories attack the taken-for-granted world of their audience. They stand out in contrast to the routinized assumptions that people use to navigate their professional and intellectual lives. This means that to be interesting, you must first understand what your audience takes for granted. What are the unexamined assumptions in your field? What do people believe without really thinking about it? These assumptions are your opportunity for interesting scholarship. Davis identified 12 logical categories of interesting propositions, and I want to walk you through each one with detailed examples from management and organizational research. Because understanding these categories provides a systematic approach to identifying research opportunities that will make genuine contributions to knowledge rather than simply filling arbitrary gaps in existing literature. Davis's Index of the Interesting, Categories 1 to 4. Category 1, Organization. What seems to be a disorganized phenomenon is actually organized, or vice versa. Example: everyone assumes that organizational rumors spread randomly and chaotically through informal networks. My research demonstrates that rumor transmission follows highly predictable patterns based on formal organizational structure and power relationships. This type of proposition works because it challenges our intuitive understanding of how informal processes work in organizations, revealing hidden order in apparent chaos. Category 2, Composition. What seem to be heterogeneous phenomena are actually composed of the same basic elements, or vice versa. Example: we typically think of entrepreneurial startups and established corporations as fundamentally different organizational forms. However, my research shows that both are driven by identical underlying processes of resource acquisition, capability development, and stakeholder management. This challenges the common assumption that organizational size and age create fundamental differences in how organizations operate. Category 3, Abstraction. What seems to be an individual phenomenon is actually a collective phenomenon, or vice versa. Example: leadership is typically understood as an individual level phenomenon, the traits and behaviors of particular leaders. My research demonstrates that what we call leadership is actually an emergent property of collective sense-making processes within organizational networks. This reframes leadership from individual heroics to collective dynamics. Category 4, generalization. What seems to be a local phenomenon is actually universal, or vice versa. Example, the management practices that made Japanese manufacturers successful in the 1980s are often seen as culturally specific. My research shows that these practices reflect universal principles of human motivation that can be applied in any cultural context. This challenges assumptions about cultural specificity in management practices. Each of these categories provides a lens for examining your research domain and identifying opportunities to challenge taken-for-granted assumptions that may be limiting our understanding of important organizational phenomena. Davis's Index of the Interesting, Categories 5 to 8. Category 5, stabilization. What seems stable is actually unstable, or vice versa. Example, brand loyalty appears to be a stable, long-term relationship between consumers and companies. My longitudinal research reveals that brand loyalty is actually a highly dynamic state that can shift rapidly based on micro-interactions between customers and brand representatives. This challenges the marketing assumption that loyalty once established persists without ongoing cultivation. Category 6, function. What seems dysfunctional is actually functional, or vice versa. Example, organizational conflict is universally seen as dysfunctional, something to be minimized or eliminated. My research demonstrates that moderate levels of task conflict actually enhance team performance by forcing groups to consider alternative perspectives and solutions. This reframes conflict from problem to potential solution. Category 7, evaluation. What seems bad is actually good, or vice versa. Example, employee turnover is almost always viewed negatively by managers and HR professionals. My research shows that moderate turnover rates actually benefit organizations by bringing in new ideas, preventing groupthink, and creating advancement opportunities for remaining employees. This challenges the universal assumption that retention is always better than turnover. Category 8, correlation. What seem unrelated are actually related, or vice versa. Example, there appears to be no connection between office design and employee creativity. My research reveals a strong correlation between the presence of natural elements in workspaces and innovative problem-solving behaviors. This identifies unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated organizational variables. These categories help you systematically examine your research domain to identify assumptions that might be ripe for challenging, moving beyond simple gap filling to genuine intellectual contribution. Davis's Index of the Interesting, Categories 9 to 12. Category 9, coexistence. What seem to coexist actually cannot, or vice versa. Example, many companies claim to simultaneously pursue cost leadership and differentiation strategies. My research demonstrates that these strategies are fundamentally incompatible. Organizations that attempt both achieve neither effectively. This challenges the popular notion that strategic trade-offs can be avoided through superior execution. Category 10, covariation. What seem positively related are actually negatively related, or vice versa. Example, conventional wisdom suggests that CEO confidence leads to better firm performance. My research shows that beyond a moderate level, CEO confidence becomes overconfidence, which is negatively associated with strategic decision-making quality and firm performance. This reveals the dark side of what is typically considered a positive leadership trait. Category 11, opposition. What seems similar are actually opposite, or vice versa. Example, the terms manager and leader are often used interchangeably in organizational literature. My research demonstrates that these represent fundamentally opposite orientations. Managers focus on stability and control, while leaders focus on change and inspiration. This clarifies conceptual confusion by revealing fundamental differences. Category 12, causation. What seems to be the cause is actually the effect, or vice versa. Example, it's widely believed that strong organizational culture leads to high performance. My longitudinal research suggests the reverse causality. High-performing organizations develop strong cultures as a result of their success, not as a cause of it. This reverses assumed causal relationships and challenges intervention strategies based on those assumptions. The power of Davis's framework lies not just in understanding these categories, but in using them systematically to identify opportunities for interesting research. For each potential research question, ask yourself, what does my audience take for granted about this phenomenon? Which of Davis's 12 categories might apply? This isn't about being contrarian for its own sake. It's about identifying genuine opportunities to challenge assumptions that may be limiting our understanding of important organizational phenomena. Setting the hook: Grant and Pollock's framework for compelling introductions. Now that we understand what makes research interesting, let's turn to the practical craft of communicating that interest through your introduction. Adam Grant and Timothy Pollock's editorial, Setting the Hook, provides the most comprehensive guidance available for writing compelling academic introductions. Grant and Pollock argue that every effective introduction must answer three fundamental questions that represent a contract with your reader. You're promising that if they invest their time in reading your paper, they will gain something valuable in return. Question 1. Who cares? This question addresses both theoretical and practical significance. Why should scholars in your field care about this research? Why should practitioners care? You must establish that your research addresses a problem that matters to real people in real organizations, not just an arbitrary gap in academic literature. Question 2. What do we know? What don't we know? And so what? This is about positioning your work within existing scholarship. What has previous research established? What important questions remain unanswered? Why do these unanswered questions matter for theory and practice? Question 3. What will we learn? This is your promise to the reader. How will your study fundamentally change, challenge, or advance our understanding? What new insights will emerge from your research that justify the reader's investment of time and attention? Here's a sobering statistic that every doctoral student should know. Grant and Pollock found that winners of the Academy of Management Journal Best Article Award rewrote their introductions an average of 10 times. 10 times? This finding challenges the myth that great writers produce compelling prose on their first attempt. The reality is that compelling academic writing emerges through iterative refinement, where each revision allows you to clarify your thinking, strengthen your arguments, and enhance your communication. Grant and Pollock also found that these award-winning authors spent 24% of their total writing time on their introductions, despite introductions representing less than 10% of the total paper length. This investment ratio tells us something crucial. The introduction is disproportionately important to your paper's success because it determines whether readers continue reading and how they interpret everything that follows. 2 archetypal hooks and problematizing strategies. Grant and Pollock identified 2 primary strategies for opening academic papers that immediately engage readers and establish the importance of your research. The quote or vignette hook uses a provocative quotation or compelling story to illustrate the real-world relevance of your research. For example, Ferrier, Smith, and Grimm, 1999, opened their study of competitive dynamics with newspaper headlines, Kellogg's cutting prices to check loss of market share, and Amoco scrambles to remain king of the polyester hill. The power of this approach lies in its ability to immediately connect abstract theoretical concepts to concrete, recognizable situations, making your research feel relevant and urgent rather than academic and abstract. The trend hook highlights recent changes in the workplace, society, or academic literature that your research will help explain. Elsbach and Kramer, 2003, opened their creativity research by noting the paradox of a virtual cottage industry of management books and business school courses that extol the virtues of creativity, despite scholars having accumulated little insight into how expert decision-makers judge creative potential. This approach works by identifying a puzzle or contradiction that demands explanation, positioning your research as the solution to a recognized problem. A crucial component of setting the hook involves what Locke and Golden-Biddle call problematizing the literature, convincing your readers that there's a significant problem with existing research that your study will address. They identify 3 approaches with different strengths and appropriate applications. Incompleteness argues that existing research is incomplete. There's a gap that needs to be filled. While this is the most common approach, it's also potentially the weakest, because simply identifying a gap doesn't make that gap interesting or important. Use this approach when you're extending existing theories to new contexts, but be sure to explain why this extension matters theoretically and practically. Inadequacy argues that existing research is inadequate. Current theories or models don't fully explain the phenomenon of interest. This is stronger than incompleteness because it suggests that existing approaches are fundamentally limited. Use this approach when you're proposing new theoretical mechanisms or challenging existing assumptions about how phenomena work. Incommensurability argues that existing research contains conflicting and contradictory findings that need to be reconciled. This is the strongest approach because it positions your research as the solution to a major puzzle in the field. Use this approach when you're resolving contradictory findings or integrating competing theoretical perspectives. The key is to match your problematizing strategy to your actual contribution. Don't claim to be resolving contradictory findings if you're actually just filling a gap, and don't present gap filling as more significant than it actually is. The 4-paragraph introduction framework. Bogelsteig and Bird, in their editorial on avoiding desk rejects, propose a 4-paragraph framework that provides a clear roadmap for readers while ensuring you address Grant and Pollock's 3 essential questions systematically. Paragraph 1. Set the scene introduces your topic, explains why it matters, and briefly summarizes what is already known. This paragraph serves multiple functions. It should be broad enough that scholars outside your immediate specialty can understand the importance of your research, establish both theoretical and practical significance, and provide enough background that readers can follow your subsequent arguments. Example opening for a study on remote work. The COVID-19 pandemic fundamentally transformed how and where people work, with remote work shifting from a rare accommodation to a mainstream practice affecting millions of employees worldwide. This transformation has profound implications for organizational design, employee well-being, and managerial practice, while early research on remote work focused primarily on productivity outcomes. Emerging evidence suggests that the effects of remote work extend far beyond simple performance metrics to encompass fundamental changes in how employees experience work, form relationships with colleagues, and construct their professional identities. Paragraph 2. The gap identifies what we don't know using one of the problematizing approaches we discussed. This paragraph should identify the specific limitation in existing research, explain why this limitation matters for theory and practice, and set up your study as the solution to this limitation. Continuing our remote work example, however, existing research on remote work suffers from a critical limitation. It treats remote work as a uniform phenomenon, failing to account for the substantial variation in how remote work is implemented across different organizational contexts. Some organizations provide extensive technological support and formal remote work policies, while others offer minimal infrastructure and rely on informal arrangements. This variation matters because the organizational context of remote work likely shapes its effects on employee outcomes. Without understanding how contextual factors moderate the effects of remote work, we cannot provide actionable guidance to organizations seeking to optimize their remote work practices. Paragraph 3. The study introduces your study and explains how it addresses the gap you've identified. This paragraph should present your research question clearly and concisely, describe your theoretical approach and key concepts, outline your methodological strategy at a high level, and connect your approach to the gap you've identified. Paragraph 4. The contribution previews your findings and highlights your key contributions. This paragraph should summarize your main findings without getting into detailed results. Articulate your theoretical contributions clearly, explain the practical implications of your research, and connect back to the broader significance established in paragraph 1. This 4-paragraph structure works because it follows a logical progression that mirrors how readers process new information. Orientation, paragraph 1 orients readers to the domain and establishes relevance. Motivation, paragraph 2 creates motivation by identifying a significant problem. Solution, paragraph 3 presents your study as the solution to that problem. And payoff, paragraph 4 delivers the payoff by showing what readers will gain. The AMJ Management Research Canvas, ensuring research coherence. The final tool comes from Dorobantu and her colleagues, who developed the AMJ Management Research Canvas as a comprehensive framework for designing and evaluating research projects. The canvas is based on a crucial insight. Successful research projects require all elements to fit together coherently. As Dorobantu et al. Explain, the canvas is arranged as a puzzle because each element must fit with related elements for the resulting research, study, proposal, or manuscript to be cohesive. The canvas includes 9 core elements that must work together: the puzzle, the central theoretical or phenomenological question that your research addresses, audience and prior research, the specific scholarly conversation you're contributing to, research question, the specific question that your study will answer, theoretical constructs and relationships, the key concepts and relationships you'll investigate, research setting, the context in which you'll conduct your research, research design and analysis, your methodological approach, empirical findings, the results of your analysis, contributions, the new knowledge your study creates, and boundary conditions and limitations, the scope and limitations of your findings. At the center of the canvas is the puzzle, the broad theoretical or phenomenological question that drives your research. This is not your specific research question, but rather the larger intellectual challenge that your research addresses. Examples include what explains performance variation within industries, or how do organizations adapt to environmental change? The puzzle serves as the anchor for all other elements, and every other component of your research should connect back to this central puzzle. Understanding your audience is crucial for doctoral level research. Your audience consists of the scholars who are most likely to read, cite, and build upon your work. To identify your audience, consider which scholars are publishing on your puzzle, what journals publish this research, what conferences feature this work, and who are the 10 to 20 most influential scholars in this area. Understanding your audience helps you frame your contribution appropriately and position your work within the right scholarly conversation. The real power of the canvas lies in using it to check the coherence of your research design. Ask yourself, does my research question flow logically from my puzzle? Is my theoretical framework appropriate for my research question? Is my research setting suitable for testing my theoretical framework? Do my methods provide a fair test of my theoretical predictions? Do my contributions follow logically from my findings? Are my limitations honestly assessed? If any element doesn't fit well with the others, you need to revise your design. Storytelling in Academic Writing, Timothy Pollock's Framework. Pollock's work on storytelling in academic writing provides crucial insights into how narrative techniques can enhance rather than compromise scholarly rigor. Pollock argues that academic writing is fundamentally about storytelling, not in the sense of fiction or entertainment, but in the sense of creating coherent narratives that help readers understand complex phenomena and follow logical arguments. Effective academic stories have several key characteristics. They have clear protagonists, the theoretical constructs or organizational actors you're studying, compelling conflicts, the puzzles or problems your research addresses, logical plot development, the theoretical arguments and empirical evidence you present, and satisfying resolutions, the contributions and implications of your findings. These narrative elements don't replace scholarly rigor. They enhance it by making complex arguments more accessible and memorable. Pollock identifies several storytelling techniques that are particularly effective in academic writing. The setup-payoff structure creates expectations early in your paper and then delivers on those expectations in satisfying ways. Foreshadowing helps readers anticipate where your argument is heading and understand how different pieces fit together. Tension and release create intellectual engagement by raising questions and then providing answers. Character development helps readers understand and care about the organizational actors or theoretical constructs in your research. The key insight from Pollock's work is that good academic writing doesn't just present information. It creates experiences for readers that help them understand and remember your contributions. When you think about your research as a story, you're forced to consider your audience's perspective, clarify your arguments, and present your findings in ways that are both rigorous and engaging. This storytelling approach is particularly important for doctoral students because it helps you move beyond simply reporting what you found to explaining why it matters and how it changes our understanding of important phenomena. It transforms your research from a technical exercise into a contribution to ongoing scholarly conversations that can influence how people think and act. Integration and practical application. Let me show you how all these concepts work together in practice by walking through a hypothetical study that integrates narrative structure, Davis's categories, Grant and Pollock's questions, problematizing strategies, the four-paragraph framework, the AMJ canvas, and Pollock's storytelling techniques. The puzzle canvas. Why do some organizations consistently innovate while others struggle to generate new ideas despite similar resources and capabilities? The interesting angle, Davis Category 12, causation. Everyone assumes that innovative cultures lead to innovative outcomes. What if innovative outcomes actually create innovative cultures? This challenges the conventional wisdom about culture-performance relationships and suggests that causality might run in the opposite direction from what most managers assume. The Hook, Grant, and Pollock trend. Despite billions invested in innovation programs and culture change initiatives, most organizations struggle to innovate consistently, suggesting that our understanding of the culture-innovation relationship may be fundamentally flawed. The problematization, inadequacy. Current theories focus on cultural antecedents of innovation, but cannot explain why culture change initiatives often fail to improve innovative performance, suggesting that we may have the causal relationship backwards. Four-paragraph structure. 1. Set the scene. Innovation is crucial for competitive advantage, and organizations invest heavily in creating innovative cultures. 2. The gap. We don't understand the true causal relationship between culture and innovation, and our interventions often fail. 3. The study. Longitudinal examination of culture innovation dynamics using panel data from 200 organizations over 5 years. 4. The contribution. Evidence that innovation success drives cultural change rather than vice versa, with implications for how organizations should approach innovation management. The story Pollock. The protagonist is the organization struggling to innovate. The conflict is the puzzle of why culture change initiatives fail. The plot development traces how successful innovations create cultural momentum, and the resolution shows how managers can leverage this understanding to build truly innovative organizations. This integration demonstrates how these frameworks work together to create compelling, rigorous academic arguments that advance knowledge while engaging readers intellectually and emotionally. Your action items. As you leave today's lecture, I want you to take specific actions that will help you apply these concepts to your own research and writing. These aren't just exercises, they're essential steps in developing the scholarly communication skills that will serve you throughout your doctoral program and academic career. First, conduct a narrative analysis of existing literature. Take 3 articles from your field, 1 that you found compelling and 2 that felt flat or difficult to follow. Analyze them using Freytag's pyramid and the hourglass model to understand their narrative structure. What structural differences do you notice between the compelling article and the others? How do the authors build tension, create engagement, and deliver satisfying resolutions? This analysis will help you internalize effective narrative patterns and avoid common structural problems. Second, practice applying Davis's categories to your research domain. Take your current research interest and systematically work through each of Davis' 12 categories, asking what taken for granted assumptions exist in your field and how you might challenge them. Don't worry if not all categories apply. The goal is to develop your ability to see beyond conventional wisdom, and identify opportunities for genuinely interesting research contributions. Third, draft multiple problematizations for your research topic. Write 3 different problematizations using incompleteness, inadequacy, and incommensurability approaches. Which approach best fits your actual contribution? Which creates the strongest case for why your research matters? This exercise will help you understand how different framing strategies affect how readers perceive the significance of your work. Fourth, construct a complete 4-paragraph introduction for your literature review using Beugelsdijk and Bird's framework. Don't worry about perfection on your first attempt. Focus on getting the basic structure right and ensuring that each paragraph serves its intended function. Pay particular attention to how you set the scene, identify the gap, describe your approach, and preview your contribution. Finally, use the AMJ Management Research Canvas to map out your research project and check for coherence. Fill out each element of the canvas and then examine how well the pieces fit together. Are there inconsistencies or gaps that need to be addressed? Does your research question flow logically from your puzzle? Do your methods provide an appropriate test of your theoretical framework? This exercise will help you identify and resolve design problems before they become major obstacles. Remember, these frameworks aren't just writing techniques. They're tools for thinking more clearly about your research and communicating more effectively with your scholarly community. Your role as a doctoral student is not just to conduct research, but to contribute to the ongoing conversations that define our field. The introduction is where those conversations begin, so make it count. Thank you for your attention and engagement in this lecture. References,